Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Today we're going to talk about how to approach reading comprehension passages on both the executive assessment and the GMAT. My one big goal for today, I want you to approach every reading comprehension passage you see the exact same way. That's the holy grail in both the EA and the GMAT. Every time a passage pops up on the screen, I want you to do the same exact thing. Don't read faster one day, slower another, write a bunch of notes one day, write no notes another. Consistency is the key. We're going to talk about what exactly does it mean to have a good, consistent, strong overall process when you approach these passages. Now, I designed this video with two kinds of people in mind. If you're brand new to the GMAT or the EA, you haven't done a ton of passages yet, great, this is for you. We're going to try to help you build really, really good habits and techniques right from the start. It's going to make your practice so much more efficient and effective in the long run. Person number two, if you've been studying for a while, you're starting to hit a ceiling, your results are plateauing, you don't know where you're going wrong, you feel like you're a really good reader, but the results don't show it. This video is also for you. Hopefully, we're going to point out some things that you might be doing wrong and show you a better way of doing things. You can put that into practice and hopefully you'll see yourself get over that plateau. Now, organization of this video, I'm going to start by rambling at you for 5 or 10 minutes to hear about what general technique looks like, the kinds of things that sound really, really tempting that people tend to do wrong when they do reading comprehension on these tests. And then again, we'll get into a really good process and what you should focus on as you're doing reading comprehension. And then after that, we're going to do 2 passages, 3 questions each. I'm not going to coddle you guys. These are tough, tough, tough passages. Going to throw some stuff at you, some tough vocabulary. There's some goofy stuff in these passages. Not easy ones. I know this is kind of an intro video, but I'm not going to hold your hand here. Going to throw you right into the deep end with some tough stuff. All right, let's talk about where people tend to go wrong on reading comprehension, the kinds of things you might absorb from the internet or something that can lead you astray. 6 big things here. Biggest one by far, missing the overall purpose of the passage. So one of the things that people tend to do is they read and they go, hey, I'm going to read every single fact here. And they read the passage really carefully. And at the end, they go, fact, 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 fact. Yeah, and then the question's going to ask you, what's the primary purpose? And for that matter, even when you get asked about a fact, what does it say in line 23? They're never going to ask you just to regurgitate it. They're going to ask you to interpret that in context. If you don't understand why the author's writing these passages or these paragraphs, you're in real trouble. So when we talk about good technique in a moment, that's going to be the biggest area of focus. How can you get better at reading actively, understanding the author's purpose, understanding point of view, understanding how things fit together in the big picture, and not just obsessing over details. Problem number 2, very closely related, detail obsession in general. Hey guys, it's okay if you miss a detail here or there. It's going to be there on the screen. What I need you to get from every single paragraph, again, is the big picture. Why did the author write this? What points of view are presented? A lot of people go down the road of rereading over and over and over and over. If there's a detail they missed, you might be missing the point if you're doing that. You don't need to memorize every detail. That is absolutely not the task here. Make sure you understand the big picture and then move on. Otherwise, you're going to drain a ton of time. And not only that, you're more likely to struggle on the questions that integrate the big picture. And almost any question of any real difficulty is absolutely going to integrate the big picture of what's going on in the passage as a whole. Number 3, rushing and skimming. There's a lot of horrible, horrible advice out there for reading comprehension. There's this idea that you read the first paragraph carefully, skim the rest, or you read the first sentence of every paragraph carefully and skim the rest of that paragraph. Don't do any of that stuff. It can only hurt you. There's all sorts of myths out there about, every passage is going to be organized, that it's going to state the conclusion, the first sentence, and then it's going to go on. Absolute garbage. That is not true at all. There's no shortcuts here. You got to read the thing. If you try to rush, you try to skim, it's not only going to make you less accurate, it's going to slow you down because you're going to get to those questions and you're going to be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, passage, question, and it's going to cost you a ton of time. Don't rush, don't skim. If you ever find yourself glazing over a paragraph, pay attention. You're doing it wrong. Take your time. Read it a little bit. Skimming never, ever, ever works on GMAT or EA reading comprehension. Number 4, also close related to the above, gimmicks, all sorts of stuff out there, all sorts of timing gimmicks. You have to read the passage in 3 minutes or 2 minutes, spend 1 minute per question. There's all sorts of gimmicky little diagrams out there, gimmicky little acronyms. Ignore all that stuff. Read the thing. Figure out what the author's trying to tell you. Figure out the purpose. Figure out how those paragraphs connect. You'll be in good shape. Number 5, topic intimidation. Some people insist, I'm terrible at science passages. I'm terrible at cultural passages, literature passages. Utter garbage. You're not. You just think you are, and you're letting that affect your process and what you do. So there is no such thing as any knowledge that's required of you before you read these passages. So maybe you have a degree in several sciences, let's say. Maybe you have never studied science in your life. Doesn't matter. A science passage isn't going to pre-assume any knowledge. Same thing with the cultural or literature, art, history passages. No prior knowledge is ever assumed. Don't let yourself get intimidated. Your process should be the same every single time. Doesn't matter what the topic is. And try to pay attention when you start to bristle and you go, it's a science passage and you tense up, or, it's a cultural passage and you tense up. Don't let yourself do that. That's entirely psychological. If you're doing that, try to check yourself and go, yep, I still have a process to follow. I'm going to read this passage the right way. Doesn't matter what it's about. The information I need will be in the passage 100% of the time. Number 6, you guys aren't going to like this. One thing that can hold you back, obviously, is if you're not a very precise reader. One thing we say to our incoming students is, look, one of 3 things can happen when you read any sort of passage, paragraph, sentence. You understand it exactly as the author intends. Thing number 2, you get the general gist of it, but you're missing some of the fine details. You don't precisely get it. And number 3, you get obliterated. How often those second and third things happen kind of makes up what I call your reading precision. Now, if you're not a native English speaker, it's possible that your reading skills aren't all that great. Even if you are a native English speaker, it's possible you're just not all that precise when you read. So it's totally possible that when you hit a ceiling on reading comprehension, it might be because your underlying reading skills aren't that great. If that's the case, and that plateau hits someplace where you don't want it to be on the GMAT or the EA, all you can really do is invest a whole bunch of time in getting better at reading. Now, to be honest, I see this a whole lot less often than I did even 5 or 10 years ago. Most of our non-native speakers who we work with in our private tutoring are coming in with really, really good reading skills. Usually the issues we see are driven more by bad processes, bad ideas about what to do on the test. But be honest with yourself. If you're really, really struggling to make sense of these paragraphs or these sentences, you might want to take a step back, spend 6 months or something doing some extra reading, working on those underlying skills. Okay, underpinning all of this, one thing I want to highlight, speed versus efficiency. Something I hear from students all the time is, I'm having a hard time finishing the verbal section on time, so I decided to speed up. That's a terrible idea. Try to get this notion of speed out of your head. If you read faster, it can slow you down. Why? It's just what I said earlier. If you don't understand the big picture of that passage, you get to your questions, you're going to spend an eternity bashing through those answer choices, going back and forth between the passage and the answer choices. Don't think in terms of speed. Instead, I want you to think about consistency and efficiency. Everything I'm about to teach you in this video is geared towards efficiency. You don't want to overread. You don't want to underread. You want to read at exactly that right pace so that you're getting the big picture, not obsessing over details, not skimming, not rushing. If you do that and you do it effectively, that's when you're going to maximize your efficiency, minimize your times, maximize your accuracy. Get this idea of speed out of your head. Don't ever rush. Don't even think in terms of slowing down necessarily. I just want you to think about good, consistent pace. Get what you need from the passage every single time. That's what's going to maximize your accuracy, minimize your times in the long run. All right. Those are all the things I don't want you to do. What do I want you to do when you do a reading comp passage? Every single time, stop at the end of the paragraph. No exceptions. I want you to go, okay, what's going on here? I want you to fight for purpose every time you do that. Why did the author write this paragraph? Are they trying to argue for something in particular? Are they trying to introduce, let's say, an argument between 2 different sides in a given field? I want you to fight for that purpose every single time. Now, I want you to be really critical of yourself as you do it. What I hear all the time when we go through this with students is they'll say, yeah, I understood that. I'll say, well, okay, why'd the author write that? And they'll kind of look at me blankly and start vomiting facts at me. So if your interpretation of what's going on in that paragraph is just a bunch of facts, you're probably missing the point. I want you to really fight hard for purpose and to say, here's why the author wrote it. Here's the function of this paragraph. Now, note-taking, briefly. Different strokes for different folks. If you need to take more notes, go for it. If notes might actually distract you, that's totally fine. I don't feel strongly about what's on your page. Everybody's different. Figure out what works for you. As a starting point, I usually tell our students, I want you to write down 8 to 12 words per paragraph. That's not a magic number, a little bit less, a little bit more, that's fine. But my point is you should be able to get at the author's overall purpose in 8 to 12 words, should be pretty brief. And again, I don't want you to obsess over every little detail. If you're doing that, you're missing the point. Your 8 to 12 word little summary of why that paragraph is there is what you're going after. Again, should that be on your page? Up to you. Some people do much better if they write things down. If that's the case for you, then yes, I want that on your page religiously. Other people, as soon as they turn to their page, they get distracted. The act of writing something down distracts them. If that's the case, that's okay. I don't need you to write it down physically. but I need this to happen in your head at the very, very least. This is either on the page or in your head religiously every single time, every paragraph. I want you to go, why? Why did the author write this paragraph? And I'm going to model this on the 2 passages we're going to go through today. Number 3, connect the purposes of those paragraphs. So as you get to the second paragraph, same thing. Why did the author write this? Give me your 8 to 12 word little synopsis of why that's there. And then ask yourself, how does this connect to the purpose of the previous paragraph? As you get to the third paragraph, give me your 8 to 12 words. How does this connect to the purpose of the previous 2 paragraphs? And so on until you're done. By the time you get through that little roadmap, you're going to have a pretty solid understanding of the primary purpose of the passage. And as they start to ask you about details and context, you're going to understand that context really, really well if you do that exercise the right way. 4th, finally, don't fall in love. What I mean by that is it's really easy to lunge at the first answer choice that sounds right to you. Don't do that. I always want you on verbal, sentence correction, critical reasoning as well. Look for 4 wrong answers, not 1 right answer. So I always want cross-elimination happening. I want A, B, C, D, E written on your page. Cross out the 4 that you know were wrong. 5th one's going to be your right answer. Even if you're not totally clear about that 5th one, if you can find the 4 that are wrong, you're in good shape. Do this religiously. It's really, really easy to go, hey, I love answer choice B. You don't really read C, D, and E. Don't let yourself do that. It's a really easy way to make mistakes on easy questions. Can cost you a lot of points. So be really systematic every single time. Don't shortcut there. Okay, before we launch into the passages, I'm going to tell a quick story about a student. I'm going to call him Don Johnson here because the guy was in Miami when we met. 10 points for anybody who gets the reference. This guy was an attorney before he started studying for the GMAT. So this guy could read. He'd taken the LSAT, did well on it. If I remember correctly, got a scholarship to a pretty good law school. Came to me and his results were all over the freaking place on reading comprehension, critical reasoning as well. But his reading comprehension, he'd get 60% right one day, 95% right the next. His times would vary by 50%. Huge, huge variation from day to day. And we started talking about it, and I started trying to get him to do this basic process. He'd say to me, we'd go through a passage together. He'd say, read the first paragraph and say, yeah, dude, I got it. He would literally say that. Yeah, dude, I got it. It's like, okay, well, why'd the author write it? And he'd start vomiting facts at me. And I'd go, yeah, but why? Give me more facts. It's like, you're missing the point. So even for that guy, really high quality reader, reads legal contracts for a living, at least at that point, really struggled to fight for purpose. He thought he was getting at it, but instead he was just kind of giving me higher levels of fact. He really struggled to see purpose. Once he started to see that, had to beat him up pretty good for a few weeks there. His results stabilized enormously. This, again, super talented reader. His results stabilized, did really, really well. And this same guy, Mr. Don Johnson here, graduated from Wharton just a few months ago now. So this works. It's hard, though. It's really hard to fight for purpose. Going to take you through a couple examples, and you'll see for some of these, it's going to be really tempting to kind of come up with something that's glib for each paragraph or not very in depth. Really, really tempting. And it's really, really hard in some cases to figure out, yeah, why is this here? I want you to fight for it every single time. And like I said, it's tough and it takes practice. Okay, with that, let's launch into the first little chunk of the passage. So I'm going to give you 1 paragraph at a time. Once we're done with this paragraph, we're going to come back and we'll break down what exactly this is trying to say and what the author's driving at. All right, as always, hit the pause button if you need more time with this paragraph. Nice short paragraph here, just 1 big long sentence. Now, again, the goal here is to try to figure out, why did the author write this? Fight for purpose in 8 to 12 words. Why do we think this is here? Why does the author put this on the page? Now, of course, we don't know where the whole passage is going yet, but I want to start with that first paragraph and just say, okay, can I fight for why? And sometimes what I'll get from students on this is they'll just say, oh, well, it's an introduction. Well, That's not very helpful, is it? We're not getting any deeper understanding of where the author's trying to take us. And I'd say, yeah, well, it's introduction, and they'll start kind of tossing facts and terms out. And they'll say introduction to the telephone exchange study by Clark. Okay, well, fine, but that's not terribly helpful either. Or they'll say introduction to telephone study. They'll just kind of start listing stuff. Telephone study, Jon Clark, technological determinism, social constructivism, and it's just kind of vomit on the page, right? It's details. This is exactly the kind of thing. When I was talking about my former student, I'm calling Don Johnson for the sake of this video, that's exactly the sort of thing he would do. We just start listing terms and facts. Not very helpful. Instead, look for point of view. Is there any line or anything you point to and say, I think this is what the author's trying to accomplish? Notice there's a little bit of an opinion in there, right? So Clark's study is a solid contribution or debate that encompasses two lively issues in this history and sociology technology, technological determinism, social constructivism. If you're looking at those terms and going, what the bleep are those? Well, I don't know what they are either until I read this passage. Don't worry about it, right? Don't be intimidated by the topic at all. I just want you to say, okay, wait a minute. What do I think the author's doing here? The author's saying that this study is a solid contribution to this debate between two things. All right. So study is a solid contribution to a debate between two things. And we have the technological determinism. I'm just going to abbreviate it here as TD, and social constructivism, I'm just going to abbreviate it as SC. And again, I'll say this again. Don't worry if you're not much of a writer, if it distracts you to put this on your page, that's fine. I don't need this on your page every single time, but I definitely need it happening. You should take this process and go, why? Can I get to the essence of what's the author's point of view? Why did he or she put it on the page? If it distracts you to write it down, that's okay, but just make sure you're still taking this step in your head. And again, if you are a note taker, fantastic. This might be what your notes look like. If you have a whole lot more, that might be okay, but I want you to be really, really careful. If your notes are turning into fact, they're probably not helping you. All right, let's tack on one more paragraph here. And go ahead and take a moment. All right, tough paragraph. Feel free to hit that pause button if you need to. Okay, so if we took the time on that first paragraph, extra 10, 15 seconds typically, to say, all right, what exactly is going on here? Try to dig a little bit deeper and go, what exactly is the author's point? Why is the author writing this? Author is setting up this debate, right? So saying that, yes, Jon Clark's study is a solid contribution to this debate. What's the debate? It's between two sides, technological determinism, social constructivism. Now that sets you up really, really nicely to make sense of the second paragraph, which admittedly gets pretty thick. So what's going on here in paragraph 2? Well, we've kind of got Clark's point of view here. So we start with Clark's point of view that characteristics of a technology can have a decisive influence on job skills, work organization. In other words, the technology can determine social and managerial organization. Okay, fine. So tech is going to determine, we'll say, social and managerial organization. Abbreviations are fine there. And then you've got side number 2 in the debate. This is the social constructivism. So social constructivism, that's Braverman, social constructivism. And that's saying that social organization, basically social choices, are going to determine how we set up technology, how we set up machinery. So again, fairly thick paragraph. No shame at all if you struggle a little bit with this. But once you kind of take a step back and go, what exactly is going on here? Well, we've got Clark saying that technology can play a decisive role in determining social managerial organization. Then we've got Braverman, there's the contrast, saying the shape of the technological system is subordinate to the manager's desire to wrest control of the labor process. And more broadly, social choices, managerial choices are going to influence how we set up, how we use technology, what those technologies are. So we see that same dichotomy set up here. Now, the one thing I want to be a little bit careful of, yes, social constructivism is mentioned here very explicitly in the second paragraph as representing the mainstream, representing Braverman. It doesn't exactly say that Clark represents technological determinism, but the hint here is that Clark is definitely on a different side of the argument than Braverman is. All right, getting somewhere. Very easy to see how these two paragraphs connect. Always want you to take that moment and go, how do these connect? Very, very obvious here. Again, once you're set up with that extra moment on the first paragraph to go, hey, here's the debate within the field, Clark is a solid contribution to it, then it's very, very easy to see how this one connects because it's just deepening our understanding of what exactly are those debates, Braverman versus Clark. All right, next paragraph. Right, as always, hit the pause button if you need more time. Okay, key principle here. Every paragraph should deepen your understanding of the previous ones. What's going on here in this third paragraph? Well, we still have the same sorts of fault lines, right? So we can kind of see from the first two paragraphs, the author's trying to get at this debate in the field. Clark makes a solid contribution to the debate between technological determinism and social constructivism. Paragraph 2 kind of deepens our understanding of that. Sets up the dichotomy a little bit differently. Now it's Clark arguing that technology can be the primary determinant of social and managerial organization. And Braverman, the social constructivist point of view, social choices determine the technology and how it's used. Okay, great. And it mentions that this is kind of the mainstream way of thinking. Okay. So what do we have here? It's saying that how did this gain acceptance? How did social constructivism become mainstream? Well, let's take one side of that debate. Braverman, the social constructivist, and it's saying that they misrepresent technological determinism. Interesting. Okay, well, how exactly did they do that? It's basically suggesting that technological determinists that they're meant to believe, they're supposed to believe, or they supposedly believe that machinery imposes appropriate forms of order on society. In other words, the technology kind of comes from outside of society and starts to influence society itself. So that misrepresentation basically says that the technology exists outside society and somehow comes in and then influences the social order. Okay, so now this deepens that debate a little bit more. So instead of it just being Clark versus Braverman and social constructivism, technological determinism versus social constructivism. Every time I see SC, I want to say sentence correction. And instead, it's kind of getting us a little bit deeper and saying, well, wait a minute. Yeah, this is the debate the social constructivists set up, that they say, well, this is what technological determinism is. We stand in opposition to that. Social constructivism is different. But in doing so, they're actually painting the wrong picture of technological determinism. Okay. So again, everything is just giving us different ways to look at these same dichotomies and understand, okay, you've got the social constructivists on one side. What exactly are they arguing against? They're arguing against some vision of technological determinism that isn't necessarily accurate. And Clark has something to say about that. One more paragraph. Let's see if that helps us solve that debate. All right, hit the pause button if you need to. Okay, once again, all of this extra work we did, those extra 10, 15 seconds per paragraph, granted a little bit longer on the videos, but 10 or 15 seconds if you're doing it on your test, reading the passage, in making sure that we understand why, what's going on here, what's the big picture of each paragraph, really sets us up nicely for that last paragraph. Nice, big, fat, dense paragraph. What's going on here? Again, we have sort of this conflict in the field. That's what the author introduces in the first paragraph, gives us more color on it in the second and third. What's going on here in the fourth? Well, we've got Clark's, we'll call it his resolution, for lack of a better term for the debate. So he's basically rejecting the extremes of social constructivism. Well, what does that mean here? So the social constructivists are super extreme in saying, yeah, it's always the case that social organizations, social choices determine the technology, not the other way around. And what's Clark saying? Well, Clark's basically saying, you kind of have it in that I believe, second to last sentence of the paragraph. Some changes can be attributed, some changes in the way, let's say, these factories are run, these switching systems are run, can be attributed to a particular way that management and labor unions negotiate the introduction of the technology. So it's social organizations, social choices by management and labor unions determining the technology. And sometimes it's the features of the technology itself that determine what happens. So what happens might be determined by the technology itself, might be determined by the social choices. So he's basically saying that these extremes that the social constructivist set up, particularly mentioned in that third paragraph, no, that's not really what's going on. That basically it's saying sometimes the tech determines the social organization, and sometimes it's the other way around. Kind of your social choices are going to determine what you do with the technology. So he's rejecting the extremes. Great. And all this makes sense. And this should set us up really, really nicely for the primary purpose of the passage, because we see what the author's doing. Hey, here's a debate in a field. We have the social constructivists who are mainstream. They're the dominant point of view in the field. Clark comes along and says, whoa, wait a minute. Too extreme. Technological determinists aren't saying what you think they are. You guys are taking this way too far. Here's a resolution. Based on this study of telephone switching systems, sometimes, yes, the social choices determine the technology and how it's used, and sometimes it's the other way around. The features of the technology itself can determine what we do with that technology. All right, there we go. Go ahead and take a moment. Here's your primary purpose question. All right, feel free to take another minute if you need it. Let's look at the question itself up here. Now, you shouldn't need to refer back to the passage really at all after this. And again, there's nothing wrong fundamentally with going back to the passage a little bit. But in this case, on the primary purpose, you should pretty much have that in hand, especially on this question, which, look, in a vacuum is pretty hard. When I look at the stats on this on GMAT Club, people struggle on this question. But if you followed everything we're saying about the passage, really taking your time to connect all the dots, connect the purpose, should be a fairly straightforward one. Primary purpose is A, advocate a more positive attitude towards technological change. Not at all, very, very clearly what the author's after is poking holes in the extremes of social constructivist theory. Get rid of A. What about B? Discuss the implications for employees of the modernization of a telephone exchange. Not at all. Now notice, what I find interesting about B is if you were kind of doing the gimmicky thing I mentioned in the beginning of the video, read the first paragraph, skim the middle paragraphs, maybe read the last one. And if you're really skimming and not really thinking about purpose at all, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff about telephone exchanges, but that really isn't the point at all. Really, the focus of it is on this debate among sociologists. So it has nothing to do with it. But again, not tempting once we've spent all this time on it. But if you're skimming, if you're rushing, maybe you'd fall for that one. What about C? Consider a successful challenge to the constructivist view of technological change. That's exactly what we've been talking about. Pretty perfect. But again, good process here. I'm going to go ahead and read D and E. What if I just misread C? I don't want to fall in love with it, pick it, move on. Go ahead and take the 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, cover your butt. Adaptive tests like the GMAT executive assessment. You miss easy questions, you get yourself in trouble. Let's verify, make sure that the other two aren't good. D, challenge the position of advocates of technological determinism. Not at all. Really, Clark here and the author are challenging the social constructivists. Yes, there's the clarification of what technological determinism is here, but they're really not challenging the position of the technological determinists. That's not the purpose. D is out. And E suggests that the social causes of technological change should be studied in real situations. Well, I suppose that's something that Clark does. So it's not to say that this is false or anything like that. Clark goes ahead and does study the social causes of technological change in a way in a real setting of telephone switching systems. But that certainly isn't the point of it. The whole purpose of all this is a critique of social constructivism. So E is out and C is our winner. All right. Let's go ahead and hit the next question. Go ahead and take a moment. All right, hit the pause button if you need to. Now, really, really classic case of, yeah, it's kind of a detail question, right? We can kind of point to a chunk of the passage and say, yeah, this is where the author gets into this. But it's going to be so much easier once you understand the big picture. You're going to cut through this so much faster than you would if you were kind of had a hazy understanding of the passage and you go trying to hunt around for this information. Going to be really, really tough to make sense of it. So we're going to zoom in on that second paragraph, the one here that really mentions this chunk. So the information in the passage suggests that Clark believes that which of these would be true if social constructivism has not gained widespread acceptance. So we know from kind of what we did before that social constructivism is brought up as this, is kind of introduced as this mainstream way of thinking about this. In that second paragraph, we can zoom in there. So kind of that second highlighted sentence, so that first highlighted block, Clark believes this possibility. Well, what possibility? Well, it's in the previous sentence. So technology can be primary determinant of social and managerial organization. Clark believes that that has been obscured by the recent sociological fashion, exemplified by Braverman. That's what we call social constructivism. So in other words, social constructivism gains widespread acceptance, and because of that, we're obscuring the idea that technology can be a primary determinant of social and managerial organization. Okay, With that in mind, we should be able to cut through these answer choices really, really quickly. A, businesses would be more likely to modernize without considering the social consequence of their actions. This has absolutely nothing to do with anything that was mentioned in the passage. Nothing about businesses being more likely to modernize. We're really interested in this critique of social constructivism and whether technology can primarily determine some parts of social managerial organization. What about B? There'd be greater understanding of the role played by technology in producing social change. Exactly. This is exactly what that paragraph's saying. We can hold on to B. But once again, I'm not stopping there. I'm going to cover my butt. I don't want to make silly errors. Don't want to miss something that's easy for me. Go ahead and take the 15, 20 seconds. Go through the remaining answer choices. You never know. What if I misread B, misunderstood it? So I'm going to verify by making sure that C, D, and E are problematic. C, businesses would be less likely to understand the attitudes of employees. Absolutely nothing here about attitudes of employees. Really not the thing that Clark is arguing about. What about D, modernization would have occurred at the slower rate? Once again, Clark is not interested at all in the pace of modernization. D's out. And what about E? Technology would have played a greater part in determining the role of business in society. This one kind of sounds okay, right? So it's the role that technology plays, but this is taking it in a different direction, right? E is saying that technology would play a greater role in what exactly? Determining the role of business in society. No. It's that technology can play a role in producing social change, social managerial organization, but that's very different than saying the role as a whole of business in society. So for that reason, E is out. Okay, B is our winner. One more question on this passage, and then we'll tackle another one, totally different topic on that next passage. One last question here. Go ahead and take a moment. All right, take another minute if you need it. All right. Now, once again, this is one of those things that if you're not approaching reading comprehension in the best, most efficient way, and you're kind of going through the passage quickly, you might look at this question and go, hey, it focuses on 3 highlighted words, or what you often see on the test is line reference. In line 23, why does the author say this? And you might think, hey, I can just look at line 23, read the context around it, and I'm good. But actually, that makes your life a whole lot harder. I'm not sure you're going to get this question right if you do that, because really the heart of what this question is getting at really has to do with the whole purpose of the entire passage as a whole. And that's a very, very common thing. Even the most granular little line reference based questions are often rooted in the big picture of the passage. Do you understand what's going on here? Why the author wrote the whole thing? What broad points are being made? Now, I'm going to zoom in just on that paragraph that has that phrase "are supposed to" in it. Now, funky little turn of phrase here, because "are supposed to" could mean a couple different things, right? It could mean that you should do something. So I could say, yes, GMAT students are supposed to not bring weapons. GMAT students are supposed to refrain from bringing weapons to the test center. Terrible example, right? But we're saying you should do something, or you should not do something. Now, that's not what's going on here, right? So if you understand the big picture of the passage, we're talking about social constructivists and how they misconstrue what technological determinists actually believe. So then we're saying that technological determinists supposedly believe these things, right? That machinery imposes order on society, that technology comes from outside society. And the whole point of this paragraph that we spent time discussing is that, no, that's wrong. That's not what they actually believe. So in this case, instead of meaning should, what it basically means is supposedly, right? Really subtle thing. If you're just kind of hunting and pecking around and understand the passage as a whole, tough question. If you understand the passage in general, this is going to be pretty easy to slice through. All right, so why does the author use this phrase? A, suggests that a contention made by constructivists regarding determinists is inaccurate. That's exactly it. Technological determinists don't actually believe this. but social constructivists basically claim that they do. You can hang on to A. And I know I'm a broken record here, but I'm going to go ahead and go through B, C, D, and E. Always cover your butt. Don't cut corners here. It'll cost you. Miss some easy questions. You're in trouble on adaptive test. B, define the generally accepted position of determinists regarding the implementation of technology. Subtle here. This one actually sounds pretty good. Yes, in a way, it defines the position of the determinists regarding the implementation of technology. It's kind of true. It doesn't define the generally accepted position. It's what social constructivists claim they believe. But the whole point of this paragraph is it is not generally accepted. Clark, the whole point of this article is that Clark does not believe that and says, no, that's not the case here. That's not what technological determinists actually believe. So incorrect to say that this is defining the generally accepted position. It's a position that is misrepresented by the social constructivists. So subtle, but B is out because that position is not generally accepted. C, engage in speculation about the motivation of determinists. Absolutely nothing here about the motivation of determinists. You can get rid of that. D, lend support to a comment critical of the position of determinists. Not quite, it's kind of the other way around, right? The whole point of this paragraph is social constructivists really, really critical of determinists, but we're not supporting that comment that's critical of them. It's very much the opposite. We're actually kind of criticizing the social constructivist critique of them. So D is out. And E, contrast the historical position of determinists with their position regarding the exchange modernization. Now we're just kind of out in left field. That's not what's going on here at all. Okay. And A is our winner. All right. I'm going to be honest with you. Really tough passage. So I realize that this is kind of our general how to approach reading comp video. I gave you a pretty tough passage here. If you struggled, if you had a hard time reading this thing, had a hard time with these questions, no shame at all, because these were tough deliberately. These are the kinds of questions that maybe 50, 60, 65% of people are getting right on GMAT Club. Tough questions. I'd call these broadly maybe 700 level-ish, something like that. So if you're struggling, no worries at all. This is meant to be tough, meant to be a challenge. I'm not coddling you here in this video. All right. One more passage. This one's going to be a science passage. And like I said, don't get intimidated by the topic. Maybe you knew nothing about technological determinism and social constructivism before tackling this one. I certainly didn't before tackling this when I first saw it. No problem. Everything is meant to be explained in the passage. Same thing with this one. Going to have some little creatures that, to be honest with you, I'd never heard of before I saw this passage for the first time. Go ahead and take a moment on that first paragraph. Right, if you need another minute, feel free to hit that pause button. Okay, as always here, we're going after something we can hang our hats on and say, why is the author writing this? Are they setting something up for us? Can we see some structure? Can we see some sort of point of view? Can we see an opinion? Anything like that. And if you're just turning this into fact, it's going to make it a lot tougher to make sense of the paragraphs that follow. It's exactly what we saw in that previous one. Tough passage, a little bit more, sociological, some tough vocabulary in there. If you took the time on that first paragraph to go, hey, wait a minute, I think I see sort of this debate being set up, this dichotomy between two different things, that helps make sense of everything that follows, makes you read the rest of it better. Same thing here. It's really, really tempting to just kind of go, okay, I'm gonna vomit out some facts. Hey, these conodonts or conodonts, you can pronounce it either way. They were spiky phosphatic remains 520 million years ago. They were controversial, et cetera, et cetera. You could have 10 different lines of facts here, not going to do you one bit of good. Instead, take a moment. If you have to read the paragraph to make sense of it, totally fine. thing that catches my eye here as far as the organization, why is the author writing this? What are they going after? Let me fight for that. I think what we're going after here is we kind of have this before this discovery, right? So paragraph 1. Well, what do we know? So before, well, we didn't really know much about these things at all. We know that they were controversial, and that we didn't really know anything about them, right? So scientists said that the nature of the organism and the function of the remains were unknown. So I'll just kind of say controversial and the nature and function unknown. What were these 520 million year old little critters doing? Nobody knew. And then we kind of have the after. So this 1981 discovery. And it veers off in a direction that I'm not sure you would necessarily expect, or if you start skimming, you might miss it entirely, which is, where this is taking us really isn't about the conodonts themselves, right? It's saying that after, so we get not just the little phosphatic spiky remains, but now we get the remains of the tiny soft-bodied animals. So not just the spiky phosphatic bits, but we get the remains of apparently the whole animal, or at least the soft-bodied parts of it. So we're not just learning about the conodonts here. Look at the very end of that paragraph. Scientists' reconstructions of the anatomy have important implications for hypotheses concerning the development of the vertebrae skeleton as a whole. Interesting. Okay. So your after here is we have implications for the development of the vertebrae. Okay. Now, again, if you skim through this, or if you kind of take sort of a fact approach, you just like catch that this isn't necessarily going in the most obvious direction. We're talking about this particular kind of creature, and now all of a sudden we're talking about implications for the development of the vertebrae. So do I know exactly where this passage is going on the whole? I don't at this point. What I do know is the author set us up with a little bit of a conflict between before and after. Maybe conflict's the wrong word, but a little bit of a dichotomy between before and after. Before, we knew nothing. They were controversial little creatures, these spiky phosphatic remains. They didn't tell us much. We didn't know the function or the nature of anything that this creature had going on in its body. After this 1981 discovery, we get more than just the phosphatic remains. We've got remnants of the soft-bodied bits, and that has implications for the development of vertebrae. My hunch is that we're going to be focusing on this as we move forward. It's not my job to predict that, but that seems to be sort of this dichotomy the author's setting up. Now, with that in mind, it's going to be a lot easier to make sense of the paragraphs that follow. Go ahead and take a look. All right, go ahead and take a minute. If you need it, hit the pause button. All right. So once again, kind of interesting here. If you take a moment, pretty dense paragraph, not super complicated language. Don't get intimidated by the specific names of any of these little creatures. So once again, we kind of have this little dichotomy getting set up, right? So we have kind of the traditionalist view. So what do the traditionalists say? The traditionalists are saying that vertebrae, so that skeleton, are defensive, and that you have the scales come first and then teeth. And then we've got that nice little however, about 2/3 of the way through the paragraph saying, however, there's a different bunch of paleontologists that believe something different. So we've got group 1, we've got the traditionalists saying vertebrate are defensive. Group 2 saying, no. So others are saying that there's no way that we would have evolved all these other great things that vertebrates have, like paradise and skeletal adaptation. So we do things like move and write things with dry erase markers, never would have evolved unless the vertebrates were predatory at first. So the first vertebrates must have been predatory. So this is saying the vertebrae are defensive, that the first vertebrates were prey animals, that they were maybe kind of, there's some details there. They were sedentary suspension feeders, just kind of hanging out in the water, eating stuff. They were soft bodied, so they developed these plates to defend themselves against predators. So that's one view. Traditionalists, the vertebrae are defensive. We developed these bony plates first as vertebrates, and then we developed teeth. And then there's kind of the opposing view that says exactly the opposite, that the first vertebrates were predators. And opposite way here. Instead of the scales coming first and then the teeth evolved, that instead vertebrates evolved teeth first and then scales. Now notice, I don't know exactly what the author's thinking here. So I want to fight for that. I want to think about that. I want to think about point of view every single time, every paragraph, and go, what's the author saying? Is the author taking sides yet? I don't know. But how does all this add up? I'm not 100% sure where the author's taking this yet. I don't know the author's point of view. But I do know this first paragraph saying before we discovered more about these conodonts, before we discovered their full remains, so the bits other than just the little phosphatic spiky bits, that they were controversial. We didn't know the nature of the function of them at all. After this discovery, there's implications for the development of the vertebrae. Okay, great. Now we're into the development of the vertebrae. So here were the views initially. Traditionalists back in the day were saying, nope, vertebrae, they were initially prey animals. They developed these bony scales first as defense. Later on, they developed teeth. Then there's a second camp that says, nope, the first creatures with skeletons with vertebrae were actually predators. The teeth came first and then the protective scales. So are we sure exactly how this maps on? Not exactly, but it kind of seems like here's a general debate that was going on in the field, and the author's saying, well, wait a minute, we learned something about conodonts here in that 1981 discovery that's going to shed some light on this debate. Again, not my job to predict, but at least I can kind of see the purpose here. Here's the broader debate in the field that's introduced right here. Okay, gives me a feel for where we're headed. Going to make it much, much easier to understand this third paragraph. Go ahead and take a look. Right, if you need another minute, feel free to take it, hit that pause button. For everybody else, all right, what's this third paragraph doing here? Once again, I know I'm a broken record here, but if you've really taken the time to understand these first two paragraphs well, try to connect the dots between them, this third paragraph makes a whole lot more sense because you got the first couple sentences where it's kind of going on about details and there's some intimidating vocabulary. I've never seen the word notochord anywhere else in my entire life. I don't really know what it is, something at the back of the body. Who cares? Don't get intimidated by a word or two you don't know, whether it's specific vocabulary or a general vocabulary, because if you can still understand why, what is this here for? What's the author's point? Why did the author write this? You're in business. Now here, it should be pretty clear once you finish reading that third paragraph, that kind of the whole point here is that we have this whole second paragraph introducing this idea that hey, paleontologists were trying to figure out, was the vertebrae skeleton developed as an aggressive thing or as a defensive thing? Were vertebrates prey animals? Were they predators? So stated very, very clearly at the end. It takes a while for us to get there, all sorts of details along the way. But it now appears, after this discovery in 1981, that the hard parts of the mouth, first of all, the mouth of an animal, improved its efficiency as a predator. So aggression rather than protection was the driving force behind the vertebrae skeleton. There we go, right? So we kind of resolve this whole thing and say, no, group 2 is right. So these guys were correct. Vertebrae were developed, put an equal sign there, as aggressive, not protective, predatory. Now, a whole lot of details here. Is it worth spending a ton of time on them? Not necessarily. You should probably make sure that you understand kind of how they fit in. So we found out all these things. First sentence is kind of talking about how we found out these things from the conodonts, from studying those guys. Lack of any mineralized structures apart from the elements in the mouth indicate that they were more primitive than those armored jawless fishes that were mentioned earlier. So we know they're more primitive, that these conodonts were older. Great. So this is all kind of stuff in the first couple sentences of the paragraph that leads us to this conclusion. Why did vertebrate skeletons evolve? What were they for? Harder parts in the mouth become more efficient at chomping on prey animals. So great. Final point. What's the author done? Kind of taken this, hey, there's a before and an after. So we didn't really know what these little conodonts were for. We learned a bunch of stuff about them. They told us, had some implications for development of the vertebrae. Let's take a step back. What's that overall debate? One group says vertebrate skeleton was defensive. Another group said it was offensive. These were predators. Resolves the debate. Once again, looks a little bit like that last passage, right? So this discovery kind of resolves the debate. And the author's coming down pretty clearly on the side of saying, yeah, it turns out the vertebrate skeleton was a predatory measure. So pretty clear all this fits together. And I know I'm a broken record here. I'm going to keep saying it. Taking a breath, making sure you understand the why of those first 2 paragraphs, making sure you fight to understand the author's purpose. It just makes everything easier to read as you go along, going to make you more efficient. All right, let's hit that first question. There we go. As always, hit the pause button if you need it. Okay, great example of one of those questions that kind of looks like you should start diving through the paragraphs. If you're doing that, you kind of missed out, right? It's kind of a big picture question disguised very, very nicely as a detailed question. This should be something that if you understood the big picture of the passage, should slice right through this one once again. So according to the passage, anatomical evidence provided by the preserved soft bodies of conodonts led scientists to conclude what? Again, a whole point of the passage here. What can we conclude from this? A, can we conclude that conodonts had actually been invertebrate carnivores? Nope. Whole point of the passage is we're talking about vertebrates. So yes, they were carnivores, but they were vertebrates. A's out. B, conodonts' teeth were adapted from protective bony scales. So that was kind of this whole business in the second paragraph where it introduces the kind of that fundamental controversy in the field before the discovery. Did vertebrates did they evolve the bony plates, the scales, the protective stuff first, and then teeth? Or teeth first, and then the protection, the scales, the plates? Well, what gets resolved in the third paragraph is that we know that it was the teeth first and then the scales. So it's not B because the teeth weren't adapted from the scales. Other way around, teeth came first. B's out. What about C? Conodonts were primitive vertebrate suspension feeders. Well, they were primitive, all right. They were vertebrates, all right. They weren't suspension feeders. Suspension feeders were mentioned in that second paragraph. as the kinds of creatures that get preyed upon, so not as carnivores. And again, we know that the conodonts were carnivores. That's why they had hard parts in their mouth that were kind of like teeth. C is out. D, primitive vertebrates with teeth appeared earlier than armored vertebrates. Exactly the whole point of all this. The teeth came first. Predators came first among vertebrates. Hang on to D. As always, let's verify that E isn't tempting. E, scientists' original observations concerning the phosphatic remains of conodonts were essentially correct. What do we know about those early observations? Well, that's this before and after that kind of gets set up in that first paragraph. What do we know about those spiky phosphatic remains? Not a whole lot, right? It didn't understand them. That was kind of the whole, not the whole point, but one thing mentioned in that first paragraph is that, yeah, we didn't really know what these guys were for. What was the nature and the function of kind of these little remains that we were seeing? Nobody knew. So what were the observations? We didn't really have very many. Were they correct? Obviously not. Whole point of the passage is we learned something about conodonts and, more importantly, vertebrae development from this discovery in 1981. So E is out and D is our winner. All right, question number 2. All right, pause if you need to. Another very, very classic GMAT or EA style question where the temptation is, hey, I'm going to go reread that second paragraph. And if you're doing that, you probably didn't read very well the first time. Obviously, a lot easier after we go through it all together on the video. But this is the kind of thing when we're talking about function of that second paragraph. Am I fundamentally against having you check back a little bit? No. Sometimes you need to look back. That's okay. There's lots of gimmicky advice out there. Oh, never ever look back at the passage. No, that's silly. If you need to verify something, take a moment, verify it. But here, this question speaks so much to kind of the overall point of the passage and structure of the passage. We should have gotten that off the first read and a little bit of analysis that we did along the way. Go ahead and zoom in on just the question. Second paragraph. So that's where we were kind of setting up the distinction between that traditional view, vertebrate or defensive. Scales came before the teeth versus the opposing view. First vertebrates were predators. Teeth came before the scales. So that was the whole point of the second paragraph. Didn't even mention really the conodonts, interestingly enough. Okay, so why is this there? A, outline the significance of the discovery of the conodont remains to the debate concerning the development of the vertebrate skeleton. Now, we actually don't pull in anything about the conodont discovery in 1981 really until the end. So we could maybe say that A is a reasonable answer if we're talking about the third paragraph. But for the second paragraph, no, we're not outlining that significance yet at all. We're just framing the debate about vertebrae skeletons that was introduced in that first paragraph. It doesn't get resolved. We don't discuss the significance until that third paragraph here. So A is out. B, contrast the traditional view of the development of the vertebrae skeleton. Sounds good so far. With a view derived from the discovery. This one looks pretty darn good, right? Because that in one sense is what's happening. We're contrasting traditional view, vertebrates, the first vertebrates were prey, with a opposing view, first vertebrates were predators. Okay, but here's the hitch here. A view derived from that discovery. That view is not derived from that discovery yet. Yes, when the author goes to adjudicate the debate in the end, take a side, the author says, yes, that 1981 discovery makes it clear that those early vertebrates were predatory. But that's not what we know from the second paragraph. Second paragraph alone, that view just existed, right? Other paleontologists believed this in the before times. Before the discovery, paleontologists believed this. So they didn't derive the view from the 1981 discovery. They had it to begin with. Subtle, but that's the reason why we can get rid of B. What about C? Contrast the characteristics of ostracoderms, 10 points if you've heard of those before, with the characteristics of earlier soft-bodied vertebrates. Not at all. We're talking about vertebrates in general, overall characteristics of vertebrates. Were they prey? The early ones prey? Were the early ones predators? What came first, scales or teeth? So we're not focusing, the purpose of this certainly isn't ostracoderms contrasting their characteristics with earlier soft-bodied vertebrates. Not the point at all. Is that a thing that happens? Well, I guess, but certainly not the purpose of the paragraph, which is to kind of frame this overall debate that existed before 1981. C is out. D, explain the importance of the development of teeth among the earliest vertebrate predators. Second paragraph, again, no, we don't know that that's important yet. It's just framing the debate. So that certainly isn't it. We're not describing the importance of teeth. So sure, the second group says that teeth might have made them more efficient as predators, but that's not the overall purpose of the paragraph. We're contrasting these two groups of paleontologists against each other. D is out. I really hope we, like E, present two sides of the debate concerning the development of the vertebrate skeleton. Exactly what we've been talking about. E is our winner. All right. So hopefully you're seeing that if we've done our homework and spent that extra couple minutes or a couple seconds or whatever we need to do to make sure we're clear as a bell about what's going on in that passage, how everything fits together, these questions, even when they're pointing to a specific chunk of the passage, are so much easier, makes you more efficient, makes you a whole lot faster and more effective. Last question, then we'll wrap up. All right, hit the pause button one last time if you need it. Last question in this video, then we'll put you out of your misery. So it can be inferred that on the basis of the 1981 discovery of conodont remains, paleontologists could draw which of the following conclusions. Now, one quick thing I haven't addressed earlier in the video, that word inference or inferred, can cause people a little bit of trouble. One thing I hear quite a bit from students, they'll overthink it a little bit and go, well, if it's inferred, it wasn't stated directly. Don't overthink that. When you see the word infer, inference, inferred, anything like that, just think, hey man, which of these is the most true? Which four are not really true? Which one of these is true based on the passage? Don't overthink it. Sometimes it's pretty close to stated directly. Sometimes it's stated indirectly. Sometimes you really got to work to make that inference. All the same, you're looking for the one that's true, the four that are not true. That's it. Don't overthink the word inference at all. So which of the following is true on the basis of the 1981 discovery of conodont remains? So paleontologists drew which of the following conclusions based on that discovery. So A, the earliest vertebrates were sedentary suspension feeders. Whole point of this is that no, they weren't. These guys were predators. A's out. B, ostracoderms were not the earliest vertebrates. I think so. I could go diving back through and verify. Maybe not a terrible idea if you did that. But yeah, I think we're saying conodonts came before the ostracoderms. The conodonts were the earliest vertebrates that we know of, or certainly earlier than the ostracoderms. So ostracoderms must not have been the earliest. So I can hang on to B. And even if you're having a hard time verifying that in the passage, no worries. Hang on to it. Be conservative. See what happens on the rest. Maybe we can slice them all out pretty quickly, and we'll be stuck with B. Even if you're not 100% sure about it, that's fine. C, defensive armor preceded jaws among vertebrates. Nope. Whole point of the passage. Vertebrates developed the teeth first. They were predators. Defensive armor came later. C's out. D, paired eyes and adaptations for activity are definitive characteristics of vertebrates. Now, it says that in the last paragraph, but is that what we're inferring on the basis of this 1981 discovery? No, not at all. So that discovery doesn't tell us that these paired eyes and adaptations for activity are definitive characteristics of vertebrates. It just tells us that vertebrates were predators first, and they developed the teeth first. So not D, might be true, but it can't be inferred on the basis of the discovery. So D is out. E, conodonts were unlikely to be predators. Again, broken record here. Whole point of this is conodonts were predators. E's out. B's correct. It does mention in there that ostracoderms were around from 400 to 500 million years ago. Conodonts 520 million years ago. It refers to the conodonts as the most primitive of the vertebrates. So there's plenty of support for being there. But again, you don't necessarily need to go digging through. If you miss that little detail, no big deal. You understand the big picture. You can actually cross off A, C, D, and E pretty darn quickly, and you're left with B. Go ahead and verify if you want. But the way this question's set up, you actually don't really need to. All right. If you've managed to survive the whole video, thank you so much for sticking with us, and congratulations. If your brain's mashed potatoes, awesome. Again, not messing around here. Gave you really, really, really tough passages right out of the gate. If you struggled a bit, no problem. We've got a bunch of videos coming up. Got Alex and Harry digging into some of the details. So we'll get into specific passages that intimidate people, talk about really long passages, talk about really short passages, science passages, kind of culture and literature-based passages. So hit that subscribe button on the GMAT Ninja channel. Watch Harry and Alex get into some of those finer grained chunks of passages. Those guys have much, much better beards than I do too. Worth watching. Hit that subscribe button. And again, thank you so much for watching, everybody. Hope this helped a little bit.